The final test, the Texas Teacher Evaluation and Support System Analysis of myself. The first section of planning is Dimension 1.1 of Standards and Alignment. I found myself to be proficient in this area as I believe my lesson plans fully supported my ability to include state content standards as well as aligning my objectives to the lesson goals each day, supported by the image on the right of an example of one of my lesson plans. Section 1.2 of Data and Assessment, I found my skills to be in the developing segment, as I realized I was not always monitoring the informal assessments of all of my students, but rather just most of them. I was always making time in my lesson plans to receive verbal or visual feedback from the students as checkpoints of where we were in the lesson, but was not able to do more than keep a mental record of the progress of each student. This could be improved in the future classroom to also relay this information to parents and guardians as well. For Dimension 1.3 of Knowledge of Students, I found myself to be proficient as over the years, the lesson plan format we have been using always asks us to make as many connections with the students, both school-related and outside of the classroom. And all of my lesson plans to this day have always made these connections. The final dimension of planning is for 1.4 of activities. I believe myself to be proficient in this area as I always make time in my lesson plans to analyze, evaluate, and create different points of views and scenarios from my students of their lesson for the day and use the feedback for future classes. Next segment is instruction, and for Dimension 2.1 of Achieving Expectations, I believe I am proficient because I had a very high set of expectations of where I wanted my students to be at the end of each week or unit planned. And since I had so much time with them, being in a block schedule each day, I was able to give much more constructive feedback to both their physical actions as well as stretching their learning mentally by allowing them to create teams and play different variations of games and make comparisons to the real world, demonstrated by my lesson plans here. For the next instruction segment of Dimension 2.2 of Content Knowledge and Expertise, I believe I'm still developing in this area. I think I have a strong sense of how to combine things like health and science and physics with physical education, but I really want to grow and extend my abilities more into areas such as language arts or math and all of the other subjects that are typically found in any level of school to help these kids make more connections in their classrooms. This area was really difficult for me to branch out with throughout my entire student teaching career, and it's something that I want to continue to work on as I am still working towards my official certification. For Dimension 2.3 of Communication, I believe that I'm proficient in this area. I am able to recognize student misunderstandings and respond with an array of teaching techniques to help clarify concepts. I have really worked towards probing my students and making time in my lesson plans, as you can see by my example on the right, and really making sure that every lesson plan that I make for every single day has time for me to probe questions, provoke discussions, and really start conversations with my students about why they are learning what they learn in every single day and let them know that it has value. For Dimension 2.4 at Differentiation, I found myself to be proficient. I believe that I was proficient because I was able to create lesson plans and games, activities for all of my students to thoroughly enjoy while still learning the content. The abilities of my students ranged from athlete to not so much an athlete. And I was able to still get full engagement from all and really show them the importance of what we were doing and why learning these actions mattered. And it is supported by my reflection given from an observation from Terry throughout this past semester. I was able to accommodate for each student that needed it, and sometimes even make these accommodations on the spot. For the final instruction section of Dimension 2.5 of Monitor and Adjust, I found myself to be proficient. I would make each lesson plan of mine contain a sectioned time slot to discuss and converse over what my students had learned for the day. This would either be as a group, with a partner, as a whole class, or just a one on one with me as the teacher. I found this information to be very valuable because the students were honest with everything that they would say, and I was able to use the feedback to create lesson plans in the future to meet their needs of interest and productivity each time they were learning something new or going back over something they already knew. For the learning environment dimension 3.1 of classroom environment, routines, and procedures, I found myself to be proficient. In my classroom, we had a routine of how to come in every single day, perform a warm up activity, and then go and have time to change into clothes. My students would walk around a gym until all the other students were present, and then they would go and change, come back in, and perform their stretches, and then awaited further instruction. I never had any type of struggle with my students in completing this task, and they were always very well organized and respectful towards the classroom rules that were set in place. For Dimension 3.2 of the learning environment with managing student behavior, I found myself to be proficient in this area. My students were always following classroom and campus guidelines and rules and were always fully participating in any type of activity or action that I was asking them to perform. My students were really well behaved and worked well with me in the set of rules and guidelines that I had set from them from the beginning of the class, supported by my evidence from a observation with Teresa Stone. And I believe that this also was my best area, as my students were always fully meeting the standards that I had for them, not only as students, but as students of their age in a high school level. For the learning environment dimension 3.3 of classroom culture, I found myself to be developing in this area. I wasn't sure if it was just because I was with high school level students or if there was something in my structure of my classroom, but there were moments where my students would use derogatory or harsh slang words with each other that I would have to tell them is not appropriate for how to speak to their peers. And when I would make these corrections to them, they wouldn't make the mistake again in the future. But it definitely took a while to get it out to all of my students that the type of language that was used was not always going to be appropriate for every setting that they are in. For Dimension 4.1 of Professional Demeanor and Ethics, I was always able to maintain a athletic dress code, which would consist of sweatpants, sweatshirts, t-shirts, and long athletic shorts. That still met the dress code guidelines of my school, as well as allowed me to move as freely as needed with each lesson and athletic activity, and set the standard for my students to be dressed the same, as well as closed-toe shoes and no hats or headwear of any kind. And they were able to complete this task really well, and I never had any dress code problems throughout my time in the classroom this semester. For Dimension 4.2 of goal setting, I found myself to still be developing. I truly believe that goal setting is one of my biggest struggles in the teaching world, not in a sense of achievement, but rather creating goals that meet the high standards that I set for myself and my students that would be obtainable by all. And I really like to take time to create higher level goals. And sometimes I feel like I can't always make the goal that I am really thinking about setting. And so it makes it pretty challenging for me. And it's definitely something I want to keep working on in the future. For Dimension 4.3 of professional development, I found myself to be proficient. I was able to attend and even help out with all of the professional developments that I was able to attend during my time at my placement. And there were some that I wasn't able to attend because they were uh, the state issued ones where the teachers would leave campus for a day or stuff like that, but I would take over the classroom instead. So, all the developments that I was a part of, I got to really learn a lot about the actual structure of creating lesson plans and unit plans and how things coincide with each other, as well as getting to look into the athletic side of coaching with my CT and learning how budgets work and how scheduling district matches and games between other schools goes down as well. And that was really interesting because I'd never gotten to see that side of the teaching world. For Dimension 4.4 of school and community involvement, I still believe that I am developing in this area. While I believe that I had a great connection with my students, both inside the classroom, working with their needs, and helping grow with their learning, I was also able to attend sporting events outside of the classroom as well and watch some of my athletes participate in their games. I do believe that I need to work on my contact with the parents. I was never really sure how to create types of papers or notes to go home or emails to reach out to parents, and I realized that that's something that I'm going to need to do in my own future classroom, and I am going to need to spend more time on learning the best way to go about those types of communications and meetings as well. These are the links for the pictures that I used when I didn't have uh, pictures of evidence to support the statements that I found with my TESS gradings. And yes, thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna miss our digital story times together and hope to see y'all soon.